it's widely anticipated that the Alberta election will be called for May 29th, but the unofficial election campaign has already begun. And there's some very, very interesting issues that have already arisen. And I'm going to talk to Professor Duane Bratt, who's a professor of political science at Mount Royal University, about them. So welcome to the interview, Duane.
Hey, happy to be here, Markham.
Well, the first one is the Pastor Arthur Pawlowski scandal, and I'll let you describe it. But I also wanted you to comment on the similarities between this scandal and the Lake of Fire scandal from 2012, when Danielle Smith was the leader of the Wild Rose. She was leading in the election, widely expected, that they would form government, and then a pastor wrote a pastor's blog about a lake of fire, and sinners burning in the lake of fire erupted, and she could have handled it. She could have diffused the scandal, and she didn't. And it almost seems like she's doing it again. What's your take?
I would agree with that, and I would make the case that the phone call with Pawlowski was worse than the blog post by Alan Huntsberger in 2012. We don't have video of Smith talking to Huntsberger about the post and saying, sympathizing with him, and I've been following your career, and this is great, which he did with Pawlowski. Huntsberger was unknown in 2012 until this came out. Pawlowski is known in the province, and especially in the city of Calgary. I have made the point that no premier, no minister, no mayor, no one of any political authority should have ever taken a phone call, given a phone call to a man like Art Pawlowski. He blamed the 2013 Calgary floods on homosexuals. He has not changed his mind about homosexuals. He's now added transgendered people to this. And he refers to, the police as Gestapo. Over the weekend, posted a series of tweets calling Tyler Shandro a murderer, had his brother harassing Shandro, screaming about how he persecutes Christians. So that's kind of who Art Pawlowski is. And just to add fuel to the fire, he was facing serious criminal charges weeks before the call, and not COVID charges. These were inciting violence at the Coutts border during the Coutts blockade. And in the phone call, she says she agrees with him that the charges were politically motivated, and says that when Rob Anderson, her executive director, comes back from holidays, she will have him look into it, and made clear that while she couldn't provide amnesty to him, she regularly consults on a weekly basis with the Justice Minister, Shandro, and his deputy about his case and others. And that is why the Ethics Commissioner is now investigating this call.
Now, why I say this is starting to look like 2012, where she had a chance to diffuse the situation and only made it worse over and over again, is because she's given a variety of what appear to even a casual observer to be very spurious explanations for why she took the call with Pawlowski, and it keeps changing all the time. So maybe if you could
most notably on a radio show on Saturday, she said she took the call, or actually placed the call, because he was another party leader. At the time, he was the party leader of a very small fringe party called the Independence Party of Alberta, and said that is why she spoke with him. But there's nothing in the phone call about party-to-party politics. So no one is buying that story. And that was just the latest version. Just before I came on the call here, I watched Danielle Smith had a press conference, not as premier, but as party leader in advance of the election. And it was about public health. But she was asked repeatedly about the ethics investigation and has said, I can't say anything because it's being investigated. I can't tell you when I knew. I can't tell you what it's about. And she was asked repeatedly. And today she held the line and said she couldn't comment. But she tried that a week ago. A week ago, she filed a notice of defamation against CBC and some of their coverage over the Pawlowski video, but other stories as well, and said at that time, under legal advice, because this may go before the courts, I can't speak about it. And then she broke that a couple days later. So let's see if she can stay silent for 48 days.
Is there any precedent for this, Duane? I mean, it strikes me as extraordinary that a political leader, a premier, would be engulfed in a scandal that she's not handling very well, and then she would threaten a defamation suit against, a major media outlet, and then use that as an excuse to no longer talk about said scandal. I don't, in my experience, I've never seen that happen before.
Well, and then to throw in the ethics investigation. Now, the problem with the ethics investigation is we're not going to see a final report until the election's over. So this is going to hover over. It's not the same as the police investigation. And probably the closest parallel there was in the 2006 federal election when the RCMP opened an investigation against Ralph Goodale, the finance minister in the Martin government. They ended up dropping that. There was nothing there, but it became a major problem for Martin, and Stephen Harper ended up winning. But that was a police investigation. This is an ethics investigation, but I don't know if this is the end of it. A, whether Smith can stay silent about it for 48 days, and B, if more information comes out, because the Pawlowski tape came on the heels of multiple stories and video of Smith claiming that she was calling Crown prosecutors about COVID cases that she then had to clarify and said that her language was imprecise. So it didn't just come out of the blue. And it's quite possible that other audio and other video is out there. And Pawlowski's verdict comes down in early May. And so that's going to bring it back to attention. So imagine he is convicted. What does Pawlowski say about Smith? Said, you promised you would do all of these things, and then you didn't. Or he, in fact, is acquitted, and people then wonder about whether there was political pressure from the premier's office on it. So this story is not over as much as Smith would like it to be.
Now, let's segue into a recent poll by Janet Brown, who's a very respected pollster. It focused on Calgary, which is going to be the battleground during the election, because that's where the most votes are up for grabs. Looks like the NDP will do very well, take most of, if not all, of Edmonton. The UCP is very strong in the rural areas and towns and maybe some of the smaller cities. But how will this? Oh, and I should mention that the Janet's poll showed that the NDP are leading the UCP. I think it's 4 points, 47 to 43, something like that. How is this scandal, the Pawlowski scandal, likely to affect those numbers, and how has it to date?
So I've seen some of the raw numbers from Janet's poll beyond what was released today, and there's more stories that are coming out of this. But she did live interviews with 1,000 Calgarians. Approximately 40% of those were before the Pawlowski tape came out, and 60% after. There was no shift in the numbers at that time. Now, part of that could be that people were already convinced about Smith one way or another, that this didn't have any traction. But the story continues. Right now, there's an ethics investigation, and you've got Smith with multiple versions of why she called him. So we'll have to see if future polls show a difference in there. But we do know that the trustworthiness and the judgment of Smith is a liability for her. Janet released voter impressions of both party leaders. Danielle Smith has a much lower impression than Notley does in the city of Calgary, substantially so. So while the race between the parties is only 5 points, the race between the leaders is much wider. And so, what is going to be the impact of that? We do know that in 2019, Jason Kenney was slightly below the UCP in support, but Smith is much lower. And that's just a lot of it is about judgment and trustworthiness, and we'll have to see how it plays out. The other thing is when you put it into a seat projection model, the NDP ends up looking like they'll win 17, 18 seats out of 26, which sounds like a lot, and it is. But that's probably not enough for them to win the election. You could end up with a scenario where the NDP sweeps Edmonton, takes most of Calgary, wins the popular vote, and still loses the election. And that's just the way the seat distribution is between the two cities and the rest of the province.
Is there any precedent, Duane, for, during a campaign, the party is polling relatively close to the competition, the leader is polling way lower than the party, and how that might affect the final outcome of the election, or does it maybe?
No, we're in uncharted territory because we've never had a close election before in this province. No previous election has the first place party had less than a 15-seat lead over the second place party. We've never had a minority government situation. So whoever pulls this off at this moment in time, unless there's a dramatic swing one way or the other, they're going to be in the 40-seat range. Probably a 5 or 6 seat, possibly even less than that, difference between the governing party and the opposition party. So in a race this tight, that could come down to a handful of ridings, no, this is brand new for Albertans.
Is getting back to 2012, the effect of the Lake of Fire scandal on the collapse of the Wild Rose vote. It almost seems like this might be one possible scenario would be a duplication of that consequence, because you've already got an unpopular leader, who's perceived that way in Calgary. You've got this scandal brewing that is just primed to erupt again and again. And it may be that even the support that the party does have is still prone to collapse in Calgary. Your thoughts?
Well, and another difference in 2012 was there was clear anger at the incumbent government led by Alison Redford, and they wanted a shift. And that's why Smith and the Wild Rose Party led polls right up until the end of the campaign. But the impact of Hunsberger, of Ron Leach, of some of Smith's comments about climate change, all push voters back into the PC fold. And we did some post-election polling, and it showed most of those decisions occurred that final weekend, in some cases right in the ballot box. That as much as they wanted to get rid of the PCs, they simply couldn't go Wild Rose. So it's slightly different scenario now, but we are also seeing UCP candidate explosions, bozo eruptions. One of them in Lethbridge has already had to resign because of video where she was saying that kindergarten teachers were showing pornography to their children and were encouraging gender reassignment. She has stepped down. Yesterday, video came out about a UCP candidate in Livingston McLeod saying, well, if you're fat and you're diabetic and you have a heart attack, it's really your fault and there's nothing we should really be doing for you. Smith was asked about that today in a public health guarantee press conference and said that Petrovic, the candidate in Livingston McLeod, was imprecise in her language and has issued a clarification. Imprecision seems to be the new joke in Alberta because that is what Smith uses all the time, and now Petrovic is using that as well. And they're linking it to comments that Smith made months ago saying, if you got stage 4 cancer, it was really your own fault and your own responsibility. So we'll have to see. In the one case, a candidate's dropped out. In the other case, the premier and the leader of the party has defended her. So with 48 days to go, are we going to see more of these sort of eruptions?
Is this a case, Duane, that the maybe more than the last election, or and more than is normal, that the actual campaign will play a big role in determining who comes out on the winning side of the ledger?
Oh, absolutely. In 2019, this race was well decided before the writ was dropped. 2015, it did occur during the campaign, but there was clear anger at Jim Prentice and the PCs in 2015. They didn't know which way to go, though, whether to go to the Wild Rose or to go to the NDP. And Notley's campaign, particularly her performance in the debate in 2015, swung that. We've already talked about 2012, but most other elections well decided but before then. This will be decided during the campaign, during that month of May. And this is all just sort of the setup to that.
Well, Duane, I'm looking forward to spending most of the campaign in Alberta. It's going to be a wild and woolly one. Thank you for your insights as always.
Okay, you're welcome, Markham.